And so what we want to do is try to follow up on some of the questions people might still have. Again, this announcement of this drawdown plan, and one of the places that we'll be watching is the local jails. You just heard him talking about that. Rob Olson joins me now because he's trying to kind of get to one of these angles. So Rob, what are you working on specifically today as it pertains to some of the things that Tom Homan talked about?
Well, to try to get more clarification on, exactly what this means. And, it seems like there has been sort of unclear statements, when they said that they're not getting cooperation, that they want access to the prisons and the jails to get some of these folks that they're looking for. Tom Homan did say today in this news conference that, he clarified that the Department of Corrections, at the state prison system, and I want to find this quote exactly here. He said, "I will highlight that the Minnesota State prison system under the Department of Corrections have been honoring ICE detainers, and we appreciate that important collaboration, and we're going to expand upon that." So he said, yes, the state prison system is honoring ICE detainers, and these detainers are, when you have somebody that we want, the state prison system has been notifying them, because it's easier when you're serving a state sentence to know exactly when they're going to be released, and they arrange those handovers. I know I just got off the phone with the county sheriff in the metro, on background here, that there are a lot of county jails that do honor these ICE detainers as well. Now, the time frame to release is much shorter because they may, they have a court date, they're given a bond, they make bond, and suddenly you're saying this guy's getting out in a matter of hours. And the clarification, the other point of confusion here is that, there have been people saying, well, we want them to hold them until we can get there. And, what this sheriff has said, and others have told me too, is that under Minnesota state law, because of prior lawsuits against counties when jails have held people after their release waiting for ICE, that is illegal, a constitutional violation of unreasonable seizure, I think it is. And, so that they said by state law, and it varies from state to state, you can't hold people longer than they're being let out without an additional charge to hold them on. But it seems like when they say they're working on more agreements, that they want access to these inmates in the safety of a jail where it can take one or two agents to take custody rather than a dozen or more in the public. It seems like that is applying to just a few jails. From the people I've talked to, a majority of the county jails in the state of Minnesota do honor these ICE detainers and notify of release and hand them over, provided that ICE can get there in the time until they're released, that they cannot hold them past that, but will tell them where they went. So I think that's what I'm trying to get to the bottom of. When you're saying we're trying to get more cooperation, are you specifically speaking about a specific selection of county jails, and rather than saying this is a statewide issue?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. There was one instance, I believe it was 2 weeks ago or so, where when Greg Bovino was here and they were talking about the Department of Homeland Security was saying we're not getting cooperation, and so the Department of Corrections for Minnesota, Paul Schnell, actually came forward and said, let's try to clarify something here. We actually are, and he pointed to, and I don't know if he pointed to or we heard from Cottonwood County, who was specifically called out in a circumstance where it was said that by federal agencies that they were not cooperating, when in fact it was the same situation where they had a detainer, the federal agents had a detainer, asked them to hold on to that person, and they weren't able to do it. And some of this too, Rob, I know just from my own conversations with different sheriffs, is a space issue. And I know we talked about Carver County in the past and how they were in conversation with the federal officials, and the federal officials, I think, we needed a little too much space, logistically, too much space to be able to pull this off.
Yeah, well, on the first thing, when you mentioned Cottonwood County, that did happen, and that was a prime example of where they did, there was a detainer placed on somebody that Cottonwood County had. They told ICE this is when he's being released, and again, somebody posts bond, that's a matter of a few hours, and they were told, well, we can't get there in time, please hold on to him, and the sheriff said, I can't but here's his address. And so they painted that as a lack of cooperation. But again, all the background I'm getting is, this stems back to a lawsuit. I think it was the ACLU versus Nobles County in maybe 2017 or so. Don't hold me to that date, but it was right around that time frame, saying that, when you hold somebody past when they're being released from custody because of the adjudication or the bail or whatever, that's a constitutional violation. And that did go up to an appeals court. And an appeals court ruling said, yes, this was a violation. So that's the precedent that has established this as sort of state law to not hold past a release without an additional charge, meaning another warrant, a signed judicial warrant. And Homeland Security has complained that, that these sheriffs want judicial warrants, but it's because of that precedent in state law that you can get sued. And in fact, that did happen last fall with Carver County, where they were sued because they did hold past a release. And so a lot of sheriffs, under the legal advice of the Sheriff's Association, is don't hold them past the release. You will get sued, you will lose, and that will cost the taxpayers. So that's part of that issue. The other issue you mentioned there with space in the jails and also with Carver County, where they declined to have a contract with ICE. And that has been explained to me is that these contracts with ICE are for jail space to house detainees until they can be, into the deportation process. And the way it's been explained to me is that the demands on that for jail space is, say they want to be guaranteed 60 beds in the jail. And there's a lot of these jails that don't have that to spare. They're pretty full. They cannot set aside 60 bed spaces for ICE detainees because they don't have that to spare. They need that for their own local law enforcement. So they say we cannot abide by the terms of that. And so again, the other county sheriff that I was just on the phone with said, maybe there needs to be a revision to that. Maybe they need to be able to, have these contract negotiations with county jails, which have a variable to what the bed space that they're asking for is, related to what's available in that particular county jail. So that's another point of confusion, and where I think the communication gets a little unclear here.
There's so much beyond headlines. There's so much context that's really important to get to. The last thing I just wanted to quickly ask you is, as we're talking about these counties, and it's county by county, and the feeling is that many of these counties are cooperating, the jails. Clearly, we want to look at Hennepin and we want to look at Ramsey, right? These are the two biggest counties. What do we know about where they are? And I know just from our efforts, we did reach out to both today and just haven't been able to coordinate anything for our show today. But what do we know about where those two sheriffs fall on all of this?
Well, I don't know if if there are changes happening, but the last information that we received, and I did confirm this with Ramsey County last week in communications I was having, is that that the Ramsey County Jail has not been notifying, when they get a detainer request, that they have not been notifying of when the release happens. And I believe, that historically, at least in the past decade or so, or maybe less than that actually, has been the case in Hennepin County, whereas Hennepin County under the former Sheriff Rich Stanek would notify ICE when there was a detainer request of a release, and then that had changed. And it could be that these are the bulk of the inmates that Homeland Security and Tom Homan are referring to, but they don't ever spell out exactly, is it just some specific jails that you're referring to that you need more cooperation from. They keep it rather generic, and that's where it gets a little bit unclear what exactly more cooperation they're looking for, when again a lot of the other counties that I've spoken to say we do tell them when they can come get them.
Okay, yeah, so much to kind of digest from everything that he had to say. In addition to the jail angle here, I know Karen Scullin's working on a different angle too. We'll talk to her next hour, but appreciate you checking in, and we'll look to see what you're able to kind of find later on this afternoon. Thanks, Rob.
You bet.
Okay.